Let's go to Karen in California. Hey, Karen, how's it going?
I'm doing good. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing great, Karen. It's always great to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you. Jimmy, Mr. Atheist, I am a former pagan, neo-pagan, and the reason I'm calling is that I lost contact with most of my family except one particular section, which are very, very dear to me, and they converted to Mormonism. And I wanted to ask you, when I started, when I reconnected with them, which was only a few years ago, this is my father's sister and her family. I really wanted a relationship with them. And being a pagan, I just toned down, my thoughts and feelings about any other, I try to be an open-minded person, so I've been very supportive of them. And part of their family has actually basically disinherited them because they've become Mormon. And so I haven't said much, but as I have become an atheist and learned more about the Mormon church, it becomes more and more difficult not to talk about it with them, especially when my aunt calls me up and tries to get me to have my mother sealed with my father in the temple. Now, I should tell you that my mother and father had a horrific divorce. And my response, I had a sense of humor. My response was, well, my mom and I didn't get along, so I made a joke and said, well, that'd be a great way to get back at my mom, But I know it really isn't funny, but in tragic way it sort of is.
Yeah, no, I understand.
You know what I'm saying? And also my aunt's son is, I didn't know this, but the Mormons have banks, okay? They have places where they have money and they do financial stuff. And my cousin's like this big high muckety muck in one of these banks. And so I don't know whether to say anything or not. I really care about my family, and these are the only people that I'm really close to now. And it's gotten to the point where I avoid calling my aunt, and I really don't want to do that. She's 90 years old. She's not going to be here forever. So I was wondering if you had any advice or thoughts about that.
Oh, I got some thoughts. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So as far as talking to people, I genuinely think talking to people about their beliefs, especially those that you have good reason to believe are wrong, that I believe that's a noble thing to do. And I do think you should be talking to them. What should you be talking to them about? Well, first of all, Mormons are really good at getting out of situations when they feel attacked. So you do have to stick to questions, usually to begin, until they're ready to tango. And then if you want to tango, then tango. But the places I would start, as far as when you're going to talk to them about these things and you're going to have them ask them questions, you're not going to be asking them questions that they're not going to give up the belief because you asked them. You're not going to say, what about such and such? And they're going to go, oh man, I just realized. In the same way that people who come at me with philosophical arguments that maybe I don't have a good answer to because I need to spend more time with it, I need to spend time doing more research or whatever else, those philosophical arguments, those word problems, it's not as though I go, I don't have an answer to this. Therefore, you're right. I give up everything I've learned, all of these facts I now know, all of this stuff. I'm not going to just give it up in response to a word problem. You shouldn't expect that of people, even with beliefs that you're pretty well sure aren't true. So places I would start if I was you. There is a thing called the CES letter. It is the most incredible document to me. Now, this is subjective to the fact that Mormonism is such a big part of my life, but the CES letter is, there was an individual who wrote a letter to the CES, which is this organization within the church, saying, hey, this is why I left the church. I would like these answers, these questions answered rather, and goes into great detail. It's about 100 pages long, and it's literally 100 pages one by one of reasons not why the church might not be true, why the church clearly isn't true. Facts about history, facts about science, anthropology, biology, geology, things that absolutely 100% debunk the religion. Now, do they have their apologetics out there to try and fight back? They do, and some people fall for it. But a lot of these things in there they are not easy questions to respond to. And I think the CES letter is probably responsible for the church has a mass exodus going on right now. And it's partially because of social issues and the way they treat the LGBTQA+ community. And it's because of this this letter, honestly. And so I would highly, highly recommend you read it and see if you can't find a nice way to suggest other people read it and see if you can't get it in front of others. Additionally, if you want to find more points, not that I'm going to spend this whole show plugging my channel, but I have a series called What's Wrong with Mormonism, and I even have an introduction to the CES letter where I go over some of the most significant things in it. And I think the video is called How to Talk to Mormon Missionaries. The questions to ask them to make them sort of realize, like, they might believe and they might think God has told them their religion is true and that they have good reason to believe. But these questions will, I think, for a lot of them, while they're not going to acknowledge that their belief is invalid or wrong, that they don't have good responses that would help convince other people to believe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I have watched some of your videos and I really like them. I wanted to just bring up quickly a couple of little things that maybe will help. And normally I would just leave this subject alone because I don't see myself as a street epistemologist. I wish I could be, but I just don't really have that personality. However, I am the kind
I'm not either, so you're fine.
Okay. I'm the kind of person that people approach because they think, oh, nice person, let's bring her into our church. Okay. So I'm trying to learn how to kind of defend against that, but I wanted to bring up a couple more things that maybe would give you some insight. Dan and Jimmy, is it okay if I be very frank in this setting about some painful topics?
Go full Francis.
I think
okay.
I think whatever helps with, if it's necessary for the situation and you feel like it's something you want to say, I say go for it. Yeah.
Okay, then I'm going to be very frank. My aunt had originally converted to Roman Catholicism. My father, when I was a very young child, committed suicide. And it was absolutely horrible what happened and how it happened and all the circumstances that led up to it, to the point where it really fragmented our family in a very negative way. And my aunt went to the Catholic priest, and the Catholic priest wouldn't even speak to her because her brother had committed suicide. He just slammed the door in her face, did not want to discuss it. And I really honestly believe, from what my aunt has told me, that she became a Mormon because she thought that at least my dad would have somewhere to go besides hell. Okay. So that's what I wanted to say, is this is a very emotional thing for my aunt. And she's never gotten over it. It's one of the topics that we still talk about when she calls, because she was never able. This was back in the my father killed himself in 1959. And you could not talk about things like this back then, especially if you were religious. I believe my dad was an atheist, which probably did not help that situation emotionally for her. And one thing I've noticed, though, as my aunt gets older, her family does not like her hanging out with this Mormon branch of the family, in part because I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but I think that they think that my aunt's going to leave a lot of money to the Mormon church, which is very possible. Okay.
Yeah, probably.
So I'm pretty sure those are the Mormons that keep visiting her and sort of half-assed take care of her. And I mean, it is half-assed, okay? They're very nice people, but, probably nobody has enough energy for my aunt anyway, but she doesn't really get the care she needs. And, but because she does do it, I think that she's thinking about, it's kind of like working of signing those checks over to them at some point, someday. And this is what I meant about being frank. So given all that information, I mean, I know that Matt Dillahunty has said in the past to leave your elderly relatives alone, but this just looks like a train wreck about to happen right in front of my eyes. No, and I'm not saying this because I want any of that inheritance. I'm not going to get that, and I don't care about it. I'm very comfortable. I don't want to have anything to do with it. But she does have children that could benefit from it. And, go ahead.
I was just saying, it's a complicated subject because my entire opinion on this is that it is your aunt's money. And so if she chooses to leave it to the church, in the end, that's her choice as far as people trying to change her mind and stuff. I also err on the side of, I wasn't in favor of my grandmother in her final few months of living, finding out that I was an atheist, because her quality of life was already very poor. My grandmother is the only person whose love I've never doubted. And so I have been in favor of also saying, away. I understand the concept of like, this money's going to go there. It would be much more helpful here. And so there is that level of complication. I hope the family is talking as much as possible, but I can't say that just because there's money on the line and that there are people who feel that that money belongs to them over the church, that now would be a good time to try and attack a person who's in her, it sounds like in her final stage of life, to try and attack her beliefs.
Right.
And
I'm sorry, I just want to interject. I didn't mean it quite that way. I'm an older person myself, and I will tell you that once you start getting older, people start to manipulate you. They've already done that to me. And I just don't want to see her taken advantage of, is what I mean. You know,
maybe you can frame it as, wow, you have this money that you want to give. That's great. Maybe there's some other kinds of organizations or other kinds of charities or things that you would be interested in that we could use
won't
this
work.
money for. I don't know, man, because
let me explain why.
Okay.
Mormons actually trash talk other charities.
Oh, okay.
Mormons teach you that the only place you need to put money, and don't get me wrong, there are Mormons who do end up donating other places. And some of it's done subtly and some of it's done explicitly. But as a member of the church, you feel that your money goes to tithing, which you're just sure only goes to good and taking care of the church and spreading the word, because they lie about how much of it goes to political movements and anti-gay movements, and that all these other charities are so often so corrupt. So trying to sell a faithful Mormon on the concept of giving your money to not the church, to a different charity, very rarely works. This is actually I did a charity event for a group recently who I know the group, I know the people who founded it very well. And we did this thing, and the founder expressed to me how thankful he was and everything, and how it made up for what crap they were treated like when they went to Salt Lake City Comic Con, because they go and they set up these booths at all of these different Comic Cons, and all of the others, like, you get people who are going by and they just like had a terrible weekend at the con, coming to find out that it is people who are apparently putting on their skeptic caps only when it comes to evaluating other charities. So it is an actual really shitty culture that permeates Mormonism.
That's a narrative I did not know about. So that is actually really useful to know, that they actually specifically talk about, no, don't talk about these other charities. Look at our thing. It's really great. Huh. Okay.
It's more the constant reassurance that the number one place to spend your charitable dollars is the church.
Right.
And then sometimes implicit, and then other times explicitly just talking shit about the other charities.
Gosh, man. Okay. Yeah, this is a tough situation because, you know, it's not your money. It is your aunt's money. And you want to see it go to good things. You don't care about getting it. You just want to make sure they're not being taken advantage of. I don't know, man. That's really tough. That's really tough.
So
it is.
So I want to address the fact that I kind of see, I've only been an atheist a short while, okay? And so I'm still stinging from the way that fraud was committed on me. And I know it was, okay? I have evidence, and these people have done it before. And all of us, essentially, have been defrauded to some, at least in a intellectual way. So I just wanted to address also the idea that it's sort of manipulative to take someone who's in grief and say, hey, look, you're going to see your brother again, and he'll be in heaven. Right. Maybe he won't be in the highest Mormon heaven, but there'll be a place for him, you know? And I don't know, it was my dad, so it was very painful. I mean, even when, I know she meant well, but when she asked about sealing my father and mother in their church, I was just, you know, that was so painful for me to have to deal with. It was very hurt, you know, because I miss my dad every single day, and I wish I could see him again, but that's not going to happen.
I would say, because these are the children, the number one approach you can take to this situation is non-religious, and that is to say, hey, what these kids need to say to their mother, to your aunt, hey, you're at the end stage of your life. No one wants to acknowledge that. No one wants to talk about that, but there is going to be funeral stuff and everything else like that. We would like to get a lawyer in for the day and sit down, the however many of us, and come up with a will. And at that point, you're going to end up discussing the finances anyway. Because, and here's the thing, that frank discussion that's going to be very uncomfortable for the children, the church will not have a problem having that frank discussion with her. So somebody's going to have that discussion with her.
The other thing I haven't told you is part of the reason her kids aren't talking to her, except that one son who's in Salt Lake, and he's one of the upper, I don't know, he's gotten to the upper echelons of the church. The other kids are born-again Christians, and they have told their mother, literally, that she is going to hell because she became a Mormon.
Oh, man. Ooh.
And that's devastating. I can't imagine anybody saying that to their mother. I do not get along with my mother, but I would not have told her that something like that. That's just awful. It's so disrespectful. And so I don't even think that conversation is possible, I'm sorry to tell you.
Yeah, it may not be. And maybe it will only take that the one child she is talking to, if he can come in and say, hey, listen, these are your kids. Can you just, whatever you want to leave for everyone, leave to me, and I'll handle splitting it up after you've gone, or something like that. Yeah. There's something like that going on in my family, in fact.
Karen, oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just say it's such a complicated issue that I don't think I'm going to be able to tell you anything besides, like, it's very sad that she has picked a religion and committed her life to the religion, and much of my family's done that too. So I very much feel for you. I don't think I have a solution that for sure is going to work, but I hope that something I said might be a little bit helpful, or at least give you a little bit more insight to why things are the way they are with her.
Here's what I suggest, Karen. There's a great book called Never Split the Difference. I believe the author's Chris Voss. I read this actually pretty recently. A lot of it was stuff that I had learned in school on persuasion and stuff. But basically, it's a former FBI negotiator who wrote this book on all these kinds of techniques that you can do on talking to people, and as far as negotiating basically what you want out of the situation and stuff. And this guy used to negotiate hostage situations and stuff. And he kind of compiles it on this book. He has this business now where he trains organizations and people and stuff like that in doing negotiations and stuff. I got a lot out of that book personally, and a lot of it, you know, I'm interested in street epistemology and talking to people and stuff, so I'm naturally interested in stuff like that. I think in this particular situation, since we're talking about financials and we're talking about familial ties and things like that, I think that's a book you might want to be interested in reading. Now, of course, whether you want to read a book or not, you know, and how much time you have, I don't know. But I think that's a good start.
Good. It sounds like a good book.
Yeah, you know,
like a real good book.
And I think one thing to consider is I don't think you should be afraid about talking about this particular issue. Because either you talk about it with this person or you never do, and you see that this money kind of goes to something you don't want to see and it goes away. You know, I think that sometimes we also overcompensate with how sensitive we can be with other people about this kind of stuff. And people are sometimes more open than we might think. Again, I don't know your particular family situation, but I think if you approached it out of like a care and concern angle about like, hey, you know, I like mentioning like, yeah, I've been manipulated and stuff before, and I just want to make sure that the money is going to the right place and what you think about this and that, you know, at least getting a gateway into the conversation. I don't think it's as bad as it could be. Again, I don't know your family, but you know, I think just having the courage just to even start the conversation, you might find more doors will be open.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea, Dan and Jimmy, of just sort of saying, you know, maybe even telling my story of how in my religion I was defrauded, and you know, because I think my aunt's facade of her being so much into this is starting to crack a little over the years. You know, I'm seeing her, you know, she's kind of like me. She doesn't deal with BS very well. And I think she's kind of seeing through some of these people. I don't mean the people as persons, but I mean as instruments of their church, as an organization that is, well, we know how some churches, well, maybe all churches are, where they want to, the church almost is an entity that wants to survive on its own. And it doesn't really care who or what it sacrifices in the, you know, in the purpose, in that purpose. I do want to ask one more quick question, because I know, Jimmy, I saw your video about the little child that came up from the Jehovah's Witnesses just the other day. And Yeah, that was something else. We've had children come here too. And Dan, also your experience. And I was going to ask Anthony Magnabosco this, but since you guys are here, maybe I can ask you.
Sure. Very quickly, Karen, just so you know, we want to get to some calls and stuff, but just very quickly, we'd be happy to answer for you. Yeah.
Well, this is just a yes or no question.
Okay, sure.
So I am this person who people really do approach and try to witness to or save or whatever. Is there a way for me to use street epistemology as a defensive tactic?
Yes.
That's my yes or no question. Okay. I will. That's all I need to know. I'm going to do it.
I can expound on that in just a second. Did you have anything else you want to say before we let you go?
That's it. That's it. You guys have been great talking to me. Thank you so much.
Of course, Karen. Yeah, of course. Let me just address Karen's question real quick, and then we can talk about what we just talked about. I think SE as a defensive posture is the right thing to do. And in fact, I think if you don't want to do SE at all, at least adapt it as a defensive posture for in those situations where you have conversations that you may not feel comfortable in about people questioning you about things, or, you know, things come up and something has to be addressed. Unfortunately, we live in a world with people, and we have to talk to other people sometimes. And sometimes we have to talk to those people about what they believe and why they believe it and the methods of how they got to those beliefs, because real world decisions are happening. People's lives are sometimes at stake. Organizations are at stake. The livelihoods of people are at stake. And we have to have these kinds of conversations. So if anything else, I recommend just even studying SE, not to necessarily practitioner it and go out on the streets or host a call-in show or whatever, but just so you can be like, hey, here's some tools and tricks and things where I can kind of have this conversation and feel way more comfortable about it. But anyway,
SE is a really good tool to have in your toolbox. When I said earlier, I'm not a street epistemologist, what I literally mean is I try not to leave my house ever.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm so glad you brought in those insights on particularly the Mormon church and how it feels about charities. Again, that's a deep cut that I would not have been able to know about, and my advice would not have been as good. So I'm glad that you were able to bring that up.
The all things terrible and good about Mormonism. Spoiler alert, there's more terrible, but these are my expertises.